Welcome to Crypto in America Live, the only show bringing you candid conversations on the biggest news stories, legal issues, and policy developments shaping the crypto world every Friday at 12 p.m. Eastern. And we are all back together today. Jacqueline, welcome back.
I
Welcome
missed you
back.
guys. I missed this. I was watching as a guest, obviously as a fan of you two, but I'm glad to be back. I'm still in not America. I'm in Argentina. So
Foreign
back.
correspondent on a
yeah,
mission.
foreign correspondent reporting live from Buenos Aires. Yeah.
I love that. How's DevCon?
It's really good. It's very, very different, I think, than other conferences. I moderated 3 panels on stablecoins, which is hilarious. But nobody is really talking about like tokenization or real world assets, like things that you see as like really big themes otherwise at other conferences. Obviously, a ton of developers, a lot of companies are here. Just good vibes overall. Wish you guys were here.
I love that.
Yeah. So we weren't planning on covering this, but it is interesting to be talking about stables that much in the country where we just pulled that $20 billion aid package. Has that like come up at all? No, well, because Argentina is, I think, like mid bailout right now, so it is like pretty timely to be talking about stables and the power of the U.S. dollar and that kind of a market.
Yeah, I mean, I came here a year ago for Avalanche Summit, and the economy is like night and day now. Like when I came last year, everything was like 30 to 50% more money if you used a credit card. You couldn't take cash out at a bank unless you found an ATM that happened to give it to you. And it was like a $50 charge on top of the money you wanted to take out. And so it's actually pretty wild because this year feels like back to normal. Nothing is strange. I mean, like they'll give you like a 10% discount if you use cash for some things, but overall it's like pretty recovered. But to that point, like stablecoins are a perfect use case here. They are literally an example of like how an economy would benefit from stablecoins as like this 1-to-1 ratio. So I don't know if that answered your question, but that's my take.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, we have a stacked show for you guys once again today. We're going to have New York AG hopeful Khurram Dara on the show in just a few minutes. He's going to talk about his bid for the position against New York Democrat incumbent Letitia James, who is pretty anti-crypto. We'll get into all those things in just a few minutes. And then we'll have Paul Brigner from Electric Coin Co. to talk about Zcash's historic rise this month. I think it's at something like 60% higher this month, while the rest of the market is down, might I add. And then we'll have Solana Policy Institute's engagement director, Colin McLaren, to talk about the industry's Christmas letter to the White House asking for regulatory clarity in lieu of market structure legislation, which we now know is probably not going to pass until 2026. So we will get to all of that. But first, as always, we're going to get into our top headlines of the week. Starting off with, I think, probably something that the crypto industry was super excited to see. In fact, I know they were super excited to see because it was all over crypto Twitter. And that was the CFTC chair nominee, Mike Selig. He was voted out of the Senate Ag Committee in record time this week in a 12-11 vote. No Democrats sided with him. It was all Republicans, so they voted on party line, but he did make it out of the Senate Ag Committee. And now his nomination is going to go to the full Senate for a vote. We don't have a date for that vote yet, probably after Thanksgiving at some point. But I just want to point out, it was like record time for him to have that hearing. And then literally the next day, they held the vote for him. So they really want to get this done, was my takeaway from that.
Yeah. I think Mike has been a great sort of advocate for the industry in his work at the SEC. He's obviously very familiar and has a very good professional working relationship with Chair Atkins, which I think is going to be super important if we do actually get market structure done at some point. And then, yeah, like you said, just a huge contrast given how this position, I think, has been kind of treated in the past to have Mike come in as the nom and make it out of Senate Ag this quickly. So exciting to see the progress there.
Can I ask a silly question? Given that he was at the SEC, does that really kind of change the way the relationship is between the SEC and CFTC, or is it kind of a good thing that someone is moving from one agency to the next and it like adds some cohesion or something?
It's a good question. I think
question.
in Eleanor, you might have like some context on this too. It's actually pretty common for officials to sort of not to go back and forth between the CFTC and the SEC, but I believe Gensler was actually also at the CFTC prior to becoming head of the SEC. So it's like once you know how to regulate something, yeah, there's a handful. So I think knowing how the other side works and functions, especially when we're entering all these weird, like sort of inter-jurisdictional territories with the way we're going to regulate digital assets, I see it as a pro. But that's me.
Yeah, and something I noticed too was that if you're watching the hearing, you saw former CFTC chairman Chris Giancarlo introducing Mike, which I thought was interesting. Apparently, it's not that uncommon for nominees to have people introduce them, but usually it's like a senator from their home state or something like that. But this time it was Giancarlo. Mike clerked for Giancarlo back in the day when he worked at the CFTC. Jackie pointed out he's now at the SEC. But when I interviewed Chris Giancarlo on stage at the Dallas Blockchain Week, he mentioned that sort of Mike would be a really good candidate for this role because the Trump administration is trying to sort of blur those lines between the SEC and the CFTC right now. And given the overlap of crypto being in both jurisdictions, he kind of is sort of the perfect candidate in the eyes of the administration to be able to do that. So it's a good question. Seems to be
Good for Mike. Seems like things are looking up.
Yeah. Second story of the week. This was really interesting. So this dropped yesterday. Warren Davidson, who is Republican congressman from Ohio, he introduced the Bitcoin for America Act, which will allow Americans to pay federal taxes in Bitcoin while simultaneously funding the strategic Bitcoin reserve that was set up by Trump in March. So the idea, I think, here, according to Davidson, is to kind of create, a way for us to fund the strategic reserve without, sort of the what was the term that everybody uses?
Like in a neutral way.
Budget neutral. That's it. Yes.
Yeah, budget neutral.
Budget neutral way, right? Because people will pay their taxes in Bitcoin. The Bitcoin will go to the Treasury. I believe they have to hold it there for a certain amount of time, it's like 20 years or something in custody. And then that will sit in the strategic reserve. And there's no actual buying of Bitcoin on the market. And they're calling this sort of a foolproof, no-brainer way for us to put Bitcoin on the government's balance sheet. I don't know.
Ellie, I know you don't have crypto.
I don't have crypto.
I do. Cheryl, do you pay your taxes in Bitcoin? I don't think I would.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
No.
But it's a nice thought. Yeah.
I mean, I think
he's not watching the show.
Yeah. Well, no. I mean, yeah. Shout out. We definitely want to have him come on. And dive into this with us because it is really interesting. I think it's also personally interesting to see something come out of the House here. Obviously the administration is very keen on the reserve. Bo Hines and others, Tyler Williams over at Treasury, have looked at this issue, worked on it for a long time. Senator Lummis, obviously in the Senate, has been very busy with market structure, but is also, of course, very pro strategic reserve. So I think this is a good example where just getting something out there that folks can discuss, hey, there's some text here, we'll see how it goes, is a good sort of sign of momentum. But I think just knowing what we know about how this Congress works, there will probably be very few similarities between this original text and anything that does eventually pass. But it's good to see it come out, and we look forward to digging into it.
I definitely think it's a good thing. I mean, I just personally don't want to give up my Bitcoin, but I'm sure there are a lot of whales out there that are more than happy to give a crumb for their taxes. And it's also just a good way for the government to get it, like you said, Ellie, without having to go out and buy it at the market, kind of just transfer of assets. So it's interesting.
Yeah, it's probably, since you're not buying it, it's probably a better way for it to be able to pass Congress at some point, because I spoke to Connor Brown yesterday from Bitcoin Policy Institute, who incidentally was working with Senator Cynthia Lummis as of about a month ago. He was her staffer. So he knows a lot about sort of this Bitcoin taxing issues, right? And he said, the biggest issue right now, I think, in the eyes of people in Congress is they're really kind of anti-buying Bitcoin on the open market. But something like this might be a little bit more digestible to them. So it's an interesting one. We'll definitely keep an eye on that. Kraken filed for its initial IPO after getting a brand new valuation of $20 billion. So, I mean, that's not nothing. I think
good for them.
Yeah. I think they also had a $800 million fundraise, and I believe Citadel, Ken Griffin Citadel was $200 million a part of that. So Citadel's really, I don't know, Citadel came in on the Ripple fundraise a couple weeks ago. Citadel's getting in on Kraken. This institutional hedge fund company run by, one of the richest men in the world is really kind of going all in on crypto. If you've noticed with these fundraisers, it's pretty interesting to see.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's, so the process is interesting here, because this used to be much more common where you have late stage private companies raise a big strategic round and then go into an IPO. The fact that they priced it that high is pretty interesting, like that, because basically if you think about it, on the public markets, you're betting that you're going to
A
trade
little higher.
significantly higher than that, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like so that 20 billion number is pretty big. Their market comps, obviously Gemini had a big debut and then we'll just say slid precipitously. Coinbase, obviously very strong IPO, was doing very well as kind of a proxy to crypto and public markets, but now is also kind of suffering from the drawdowns we're seeing more broadly. So I think really interesting time for Kraken to do this. Obviously, you mentioned, like, we've been talking for weeks about the suits are here. There's institutional interest in these products. Kraken does a lot of interesting things, just from custody to their involvement with DATs to the sort of spot exchange business. So it'll be interesting to see like how the market actually receives this, given just everything going on.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, it looks good on paper for sure. The 20 billion, it's a nice number, but to your point, Gerald, like it raises a very high bar for them to leap over or fall under. And if history repeats itself, I think it might be the latter.
And I think we were expecting, I think the sort of market narrative around when Kraken was going to come to market to IPO was first quarter of next year. But I think I do want to point out what a confidential draft S1 is. And I did point this out in my tweet because I think there's some confusion around, like, when you file an IPO, you can file you file the public version of the documents, but usually first you file like a draft S1, which is like the early non-public version of it. And the SEC kind of reviews it and gives feedback on it. And then the company goes public, or not goes public, but files the public version of the S1 later on. So, depending on the SEC's feedback, market conditions, I think Kraken even said that in their blog post, they're like, depending on market conditions. So, we'll probably see like a real S1 filing maybe next year at some point. But I don't think even Arjun Sethi, who's the CEO, said in a recent interview, he's like, we're not rushing to market. So I think this is very sort of like early steps, early stages.
Yeah, and the beauty of not being public, right, is that you don't get mark to market. People talk about this with like tokens too, but if there's that much capital in the private markets, then yeah, I think being patient. It'll be interesting to see, like, either there'll be kind of a bellwether or sort of a canary in a coal mine kind of thing of like how that could go, or maybe they just end up holding off depending on how things go here.
Yeah. Well, and then finally, the OCC issued guidance that banks can hold crypto on their balance sheets, finally, to pay network or gas fees and conduct transactions on public blockchains, which I think was very welcome for many in the industry. I noted that it wasn't so long ago that the OCC and the Fed were saying crypto practices, having exposure to tokens and open public ledgers, was unsafe and sound for banking practices. And 2 years later, here we are with the OCC giving guidance that says banks can actually hold these assets on their balance sheets. I think it's like, I don't think it's like a lot, but it's like basically like enough as you need to be able to process these transactions. And it all happened under the Genius Act, right? Because under that, a lot of these companies are going to be starting to like process transactions with stable coins, which you need tokens to process the gas fees with. So pretty interesting step. I think very welcome for the industry.
Yeah, and what a difference a year makes, right? I mean, this time last year, I think we were still dealing with like SAB 121. You had like the ABA, like, last minute coming in saying, no, like banks maybe should be able to custody stuff. Like maybe this is a good idea. And to be here now with, reputational risk, sort of that guidance overturned, like these charters coming out, which we can dig into. And then of course, like this guidance, it's just a totally different world. It's crazy.
Yeah. And then just want to point out that in addition to that, this year, the Feds rolled back guidance that previously warned banks away from crypto, issued a joint statement with the OCC outlining how existing rules apply when banks hold digital assets for customers. And the OCC clarified that banks are permitted to buy and sell crypto on clients' behalf. So in addition to what we just talked about, that too. So all the clarity coming out, I said something like crypto banking prudential regulators are just on a roll this year. So pretty big changes, as you mentioned. With that in mind, big changes are on the horizon, and we will get to our first guest because this week, 36-year-old crypto lawyer Khurram Dara officially announced his bid for the Republican ticket in the New York AG's race, setting up a potential contest against Democratic incumbent Letitia James. Khurram Dara, he joins us now. Welcome
It's
to
a
the show.
Belly exclusive.
Oh, man. That
Love
was
it.
an LA exclusive because you did give me the exclusive on that.
There we go.
for having
Welcome.
me. I
Hey, good to see you.
Good to see all of you. Thank you, Eleanor, Jacqueline, and Gerald, for having me. I have to say, it feels so fitting for me to do this here, and to have my first interview to be with all of you, because I feel like I'm very much part of the crypto community in the space. I spent the majority of my career working in crypto, and it really informed my decision to run. And so it's really exciting to be here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, we're so excited to have you. And thanks for coming on Crypto in America First and not any of those big news outlets.
And congrats on the announcement, right? I know it's been a long time
Yes.
coming. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
What's the reception been like? You announced yesterday. How's it been in the last 24 hours?
It's been great. I have a lot of messages and to respond to, and emails to respond to, and phone calls to make. And it's funny, I was talking to somebody. It's probably so different than what it used to be. Before we had the internet and abundant technology everywhere. I feel like my day, the last 24 hours and 48 hours, I'm sort of losing track, has been like plopped in front of my computer or phone constantly. And so it's been great. The reception has been great. I'm really looking forward to getting going, getting out there and making my case. I think for a variety of reasons, the state AG has become this very interesting office. And in New York, I think what Tish James has done is not just wrong, but it's very costly what she's done with her office at a time when affordability is a very important issue here in New York.
Love it. Are you TikToking in that video?
I'm not. No, that was like our quick cut video that we did for Twitter.
Nice.
I was extremely reluctant to do one of the highly produced videos that everybody is doing now when they run for office, because of the success of Zora and our now mayor-elect here in New York, and his ability to make some of those videos. And so I wanted to try something a little bit different. And so actually that was shot mostly with a camcorder that I have, that my wife got for me a few years ago as a gift. And it was really fun because I went around the state with this camcorder, and everybody, when they saw it, would tell me it'd sort of like bring up nostalgia for them, and they'd have stories about their kids or like sports games. And so it was a really fun thing to do. And it's like, I have to incorporate this somehow in my announcement.
Yeah. You brought up Zoran Mamdani, and we'll definitely get to him in a minute, but you've built a career as a crypto lawyer at a time when, digital assets were still in a regulatory gray zone, give or take still is. But if elected as Attorney General, what do you kind of believe will be New York's role in shaping the national regulatory landscape for crypto and blockchain innovation, and then also stateside?
It potentially has a huge role to play. And a big part of the reason I ran was because, Gerald had just mentioned what a difference a year makes. When you look at where we were just a year ago, and I started working with companies in the space in 2017 when I was at a law firm. At that time they were called projects. They weren't even really companies, I would say. And to see where we are now, first of all, that progress is great. It's refreshing to see. It's a reminder that, we can always change policy no matter how bad it gets. But, I've never been more optimistic about the federal regulatory outlook. We're in a post-Chevron world, new administration, new leadership, new personnel. Pretty much all of the Biden-era regulatory policies have been rolled back, but it's really brought states into focus, and state AG enforcement in particular into focus. And the reason for that is because this office has evolved quite a bit. I get the question a lot from people, shouldn't this be a position for somebody who's a federal prosecutor or somebody who has a background as a prosecutor? And it's interesting because the attorney general is not the district attorney. Every state is a little bit different. Some states, they have appointed AGs. Most states, they're elected. Some states, it is, criminal prosecution is a huge part of the office, or is a much bigger part than what it is in New York. In New York, the attorney general is supposed to be the chief legal officer of the state. It's actually a much more defensive position. You're supposed to represent the state, advise the government on whether their actions are lawful, represent people in the state when they're harmed. But it has evolved to be a very offensive position. And states like New York, California, Illinois, their Office of Attorney General in each of those states plays a huge role in national policy making now, not just because of the sizes of those states, but because they lead multi-state lawsuits, because this office has really evolved to be more of a regulator the idea of filling a perceived gap in federal policy. And so if you care about our space, if you care about frontier tech, if you're happy with all of the changes and the progress that you're seeing at the federal level, you should care about my race. You should donate. You should send me money, 50, $100, whatever you can. You should care about state AG races across the country, because state AGs can undermine and undercut so much of the progress being made, even if we get legislation. Even if we get comprehensive market structure legislation, anything that's not in scope, DeFi, staking, mining, these are all prime targets for a more activist AG to say, hey, you know what? I think there's a gap here in this legislation, and it's our job to fill it. And so in that sense, New York can play a huge role, potentially very adversely. And then, of course, New York has, in my opinion, it's been the crypto capital for a long time, in the sense that it's where everybody wants to be. I think I've seen probably all of you here at different points. There's so many things going on in New York, so many companies here, so many projects here, so many developers, so much talent here. And yet it's one of the states that, services and products are very frequently blocked on a list in your terms of service that have, North Korea, Iran, Cuba, and, it's funny to see the state of New York there as well. And so there is also an aspect to this, separate from the role that New York's Attorney General can play in national policymaking. There's a role here in New York. I think the BIT license is unlawful. It was not passed by the state legislature. It's essentially a duplicative license, because you still have to get the money transmission license. And it's a great example of an item, a policy choice that actually makes it harder to do business here, increases costs, and we're not asking for any kind of special treatment. We're just asking to not be targeted unfairly. And I think it's that kind of mindset. And of course, DFS handles the BIT license. The AG can't do anything unilaterally. You'd have to work with the governor. But I think there is a strong case that there is an infringement of economic rights for people that want to build in New York because of the BIT license.
Yeah, I really like the perspective as sort of New York as really kind of a huge capital markets regulator, right? Just through the function of its geography and its inhabitants. You just kind of mentioned the BIT license, and NYDFS has always been what I would say is a pretty, if you don't want to use the word aggressive, at least a very active regulator in the space, particularly at the state level. And there's traditionally been the BIT license regime, and then there's also kind of a very short sort of whitelist or green list, I believe, that DFS has maintained, that I think they actually stopped publishing a couple years ago. But in this role as AG, because it is, as you pointed out, like broader than New York City, what do those conversations look like? Obviously, you can't come in and just sort of upend all the work that DFS is doing, or that ongoing investigations, things like that. How do you kind of step into a role like this on day one and try to exert as much sort of positive impact as you can for these kinds of topics?
So one of the things that I have as part of my platform is ending lawfare, and there's sort of an umbrella. That's sort of an umbrella policy, and then sort of items that come down beneath it. But I think if you spent less time on national politics and national policy making, on partisan lawfare, on a lot of the things I think that this current AG that we have in New York does, and it would free up time to spend on other things. Public safety is one of them, but also it would free up time for us to do what I think needs to be done, is some kind of regulatory audit. We have to go through, New York has the second most regulations of any state. Even Zoran and Cuomo and people across the political spectrum that maybe you wouldn't expect were running ads and talking about how we have to cut red tape, and New York has too many regulations. So when everybody agrees, when somebody who, like me, most recently worked for venture capitalists, agrees with somebody who's a democratic socialist on an issue, it's probably true. And so I think the AG having a focus on looking at the various regulations we have, the cumulative impact of the regulations, not just in isolation, whether they're duplicative or not, whether they're lawful. All of these are examples of ways the AG can have a role. And I would say, to your point about DFS having a reputation for being, somewhat aggressive, this federal state dynamic is really important, because a lot of the personnel that were in the federal government in the last administration are landing in states. State offices in California, New York are very attractive offices for some of these folks, and they have a different mindset. And, it's very possible. I've heard rumors that there are high-level CFPB officials that want to, take the helm at DFS. I know they've already hired at least one high-ranking official. And so you have people they're coming from some of these agencies at the federal government, eyeing some of these state-level agencies to potentially bring, I think, essentially a rehashing of the policy choices that were made in the last administration to a state like New York, to a state like California. And I think it's a huge risk.
Yeah, Karam, you mentioned part of the problem, I guess, in New York right now is all the red tape, right? And all the burdensome rules and I guess not laws, but just kind of like arbitrary processes that a lot of these businesses have to go through. And you mentioned to me that that is part of why prices are, being driven up and why residents in New York City are having this affordability crisis right now. I'm curious though. I mean, I've heard from a lot of New York City residents that they just feel like capitalism isn't working anymore, and we saw this right with the election of Mamdani. I mean, a lot of people voted for him. He identifies as a democratic socialist. I mean, what do you, as someone who's coming in on the Republican ticket, say to someone who is arguing that capitalism just isn't working anymore?
I'm very sympathetic to people who feel like the system doesn't work for them. I'm a young person. I feel like buying a house in a place like New York City is a tall order. The cost of living is really expensive. And I'm somebody who's had, every privilege and benefit that you could have had. And I still feel like, you have to have a job that pays a lot to be able to survive and make it in a place like New York. So I understand why people are skeptical, but I would say that a lot of the critiques I hear of capitalism are not critiques of capitalism. They're critiques of crony capitalism, or of consumerism, or other things that I think are unrelated to capitalism. And I think, ironically, a lot of the people that say that they are taking on the billionaires then turn around and support policies that actually make it more likely that only really, really big businesses can survive. Because when you raise that regulatory barrier, when you raise that cost of doing business, big companies can afford to hire people like me or all of any of you to work for them, to navigate the challenges they face. But smaller businesses, new entrepreneurs, they don't have that same luxury, and so it reduces competition. That increases pricing power for incumbents, and so that you're already hurting consumers there. But I also think there's this aspect of understanding where New York is at this particular junction. New York really is not in a good place. I mean, it's, by some measures, worst state in terms of economic outlook, second worst place to do business, more people leaving than just about any other state. And so when you look at your options politically, one party, and I know there's like this big battle for the soul of the Democratic Party in New York right now, but the ideas are basically the same. It's just more taxes and more spending. And if you had a state that was growing like crazy and had a ton of people moving here and starting businesses and had a lot of economic growth, maybe you could get away with it. But we don't. And so I look at an office like the Office of Attorney General and the enforcement environment that they've created, the regulatory environment they've created, the fishing expeditions with the Martin Act, the regulation by enforcement, the lawfare. Those are things that we could rein in, and we should do them just because they're the right thing to do, but they would also lower the cost of doing business, and I think lower prices, and it doesn't require spending more money. And so whether you support Mamdani or not, whether you're a democratic socialist or a capitalist, a Republican or a Democrat, I think anybody in that category should vote for me, because if you want to pay for all of these programs, you're going to need a lot of economic growth. And there are things that we can do at this office right now. There are changes we could make that would jumpstart economic growth.
So, Khurram, I really appreciate you coming on. Looking forward to the next time we see you. I have to ask you, this is kind of like a practical question. You mentioned your background. There's a lot of benefit to coming into a role like this, but there's also, it's a pretty thankless job. When you could come out of private practice or an area like VC, like you did. What made you decide, like, now is the time, I got to do this? This is where, my time and efforts need to be spent, is, as AG in New York?
Well, I'd say it's the combination of one, seeing all the great progress that was made just in our world, and a reminder that we're a citizen government. I think that people from the private sector should run for office. I think that a lot of people in the generation in power, I don't want to say just boomers but a lot of boomers have held on to power maybe a little bit longer than generations before. And so I think the change is going to be a little bit more abrupt, but I think more people should run for office. I think all of you would be great candidates, and I don't know anything about your politics. I just mean that purely on the basis of the success you've had. And I think we need more people, in office, but also, to be direct, I saw an opportunity, and I think the race is mispriced. It's much closer and much more competitive than people might expect. And when you look at the really interesting things happening in the crypto world and tech, and as it relates to, why state AG enforcement is important, what's happening to this office, how it's evolved to be more of a regulator, and that increases the cost of doing business, and what's going on in New York, affordability is top of mind. You have some election law changes that make this more competitive. And you have, I think, potentially a big political realignment going on. And then where I sit in the Venn diagram of all of that, it felt like, it was an opportunity worth taking. I'm coming from a venture fund. I feel like I'm not an investor, but I feel like in investing, timing is everything. And this feels very much like a venture kind of opportunity. Like 9 times out of 10, it's really hard to win statewide, in the opposition party in this state. But every once in a while, things line up in a certain way. And I figured, why not? I had the opportunity, and let's see how it goes.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I mean, we're flattered that you think we could run for office or any
Yes.
election.
I'm not trying to flatter. 100%. All of you would be great. Like, I'm a firm believer. This is a citizen government. We should not have professional politicians. I hate the idea, because a lot of people have mentioned, and I don't want to take up too much time, but people have mentioned like, oh, you're running for statewide office. Why not start for something smaller or like a lower level local office? First of all, like, that's really insulting to those types of offices. Being a county legislator or a council person is really hard. Like, being a state assembly person is really hard, because you have a lot of the same responsibilities as somebody in Congress, but you don't get the same bully pulpit and attention, and you don't really get, any real financial support. You have very limited resources. Those are hard jobs to do, and we need good people from the private sector in a lot of those jobs. And so I'm just a firm believer that, this is a citizen government. We have so much talent in so many different areas of our country, and I think, younger people should step up and give it a shot. Obviously, winning is hard in any political race, and you need a lot of things to go right. But I think even just the last few months I've done this, getting around the state, it's been such a rewarding experience for me. So I recommend it to anyone. And if you ever are thinking about it and want to talk to somebody who's tried it, I can't say that I've had any success yet, but I'm always happy to help.
Yeah, well, we're rooting for you from the sidelines for now, and look forward to having you back on as the race progresses. So thanks again for coming on, man, and yeah, look forward to see you again soon.
See you guys. Thank you.
Thanks.
Our next guest is Paul Brigner, the Vice President of Strategic Alliances at Electric Coin Co. I was about to say Electronic Coin Co. Electric Coin Co. The team behind Zcash. The token is up, I think it's up close to 120% in the past month, which is, I would call, a meteoric rise. Paul, welcome to the show. Tell us what's going on with Zcash.
Thank you so much. I'm really, really happy to be here. Thanks for the opportunity to be on the show. Good to see you all. Zcash has had a moment, but it's not just Zcash. It's, I think, a broader movement towards adopting privacy and using privacy in crypto. And yeah, you're showing the action there. Over the month, it's up 122%, but over the last 3 months, the last 90 days, I think it's up over 1,300%. So it's actually the fastest rising crypto of all that are tracked on CoinMarketCap for the last 90 days. So it's amazing to see that happen, but it's so gratifying to see that privacy is now really being recognized as important in crypto. And there's some things that happened with our project in particular that I think are really instructive for, I think, the larger crypto ecosystem, and that we have been for 9 years. This crypto has been around for 9 years. It's been performing quite badly from a price performance perspective, but it's always had the greatest tech. It's had the best privacy, and it's always been recognized for that. The problem was it just wasn't that usable. So going back into 2024, after like early 2024, we launched the Zashi wallet, and we've added more features to that since then. In particular, we've added a hardware wallet, which is the Keystone wallet. So that makes it easy to have cold storage. We've added swaps, and we've just seen like a meteoric increase in adoption and use of Zcash. It's really been quite remarkable.
Yeah, I mean, with Zcash, it's well known for zero knowledge privacy technology, which we're not going to get into much of the jargon here, but for everyday Americans who don't follow crypto too closely or in the space, what does privacy in digital payments bring to the table, and why does it really matter in this case?
Well, we believe that you need privacy in payments in order to have a functioning economic system. This is the way the system has essentially always worked to some degree. If you go back before 1971, where all of our money was kind of linked to gold and people held more cash, it was more of an environment where people were used to having these bearer instruments that they could transact with, and now we have digital bearer instruments that we can transact with. But if they don't have privacy, they reveal all of your transaction data. They reveal your balances. They show who you're transacting with. It is extremely invasive from a privacy perspective. So it just doesn't work for digital money to have complete transparency, which is what we have for the most part in the cryptocurrencies. So that's a big differentiation here. And there's actually a deeper importance to it, and it actually goes to freedom, and it goes to your civil rights and being able to exercise your human rights. You really need to be able to transact freely and privately in order to exercise all of your other rights. And if you think about that for a minute, it's pretty profound that we're solving that problem in crypto, and we're providing private digital money. And I just couldn't be more excited about it, and especially excited to see that it's being recognized now by the broader community.
Yeah, Paul, I think it's safe to say you've had a fun few months here, and the industry, has been enjoying, I think, a lot of progress on the Hill, a lot of engagement on the Hill as well. That said, I think one thing that this administration keeps getting criticism from the industry is sort of their stance on privacy specifically. The Digital Assets Report actually suggests expanding the Patriot Act. Roman Storm is obviously still facing prosecution. Do you think that there's a path forward from a policy standpoint here to make progress with privacy as a core issue, or sort of how do you handle that as someone who's been so deep in these topics for years?
Well, those have been very frustrating developments to see. I do think, however, that we're looking towards a better environment where we might have something like the Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act that would be added to Clarity, and that would ensure that software developers are not prosecuted for writing zero knowledge proof and privacy software, things like Tornado Cash, but also like Zcash. And yeah, we need those protections. I do think that having the broader crypto ecosystem recognize it and now support it more broadly is going to make a big difference. I think that's going to help the administration realize that this isn't some niche thing in crypto that nobody is using. Now people are actually using it, and we have some of the most, I'd say the most high profile influencers on X. I've been watching them recently talk about this, and it's been mind blowing just to have Naval, Balaji, Arthur Hayes, Kobe, Anatoly, Ansem, Mert, like they're all talking about Zcash, and they're talking about it all the time. And I do think that this is going to cause a sea change in DC very soon, and that these attacks on privacy, I do think they're going to go away. I think there's going to be a recognition that privacy is something we have to have in our digital money. I think you all know that I do the DC Privacy Summit every year. We had that just last month. And what I also think regulators need to know is that there's tons of projects out there that are trying to figure out how to use zero knowledge proofs with stable coins and with other mechanisms that allow for policy intervention. And that's a lot of what the DC Privacy Summit is about, just to show how this technology can be used to provide a variety of different solutions across the spectrum. Now, for me, having that base level privacy in Zcash is paramount. I don't want that ever to be disrupted or not allowed. But having other options is not bad. And that's why I want to bring attention to those two great projects, Aztec, Alio, and many others. Starkware.
Did you see an uptick this year, Paul, in the privacy summit and those breakfasts that you've been having, just because as Gerald mentioned, the interest around privacy has grown so much in Washington this year around market structure and other initiatives?
Absolutely. I think privacy is a big part of that. We had a great turnout at the DC Privacy Summit. We'll keep doing that every year. Hopefully, we'll continue to grow and build. Yeah, and the breakfast, thanks for mentioning that. The Pretty Good Policy for Crypto breakfast. We had one just earlier this week, and we'll get those videos published. But it's just a great way to just educate the community about crypto policy, kind of like what you're doing here. And I appreciate it so much that you do this and you just keep people updated. That's what these meetings are about: in-person networking, and also hearing from people like just this week, Summer Bersinger at the Blockchain Association, and people from Starkware, Catherine Kirkpatrick-Boss, and Veronica Irwin, a journalist. It's just a great group of people that I try to bring together and make sure that everyone is really up to speed on what's happening, but also that we build this in-person community in DC and that we all know each other and we're all working on the same page.
Yeah, as a longtime attendee of those breakfasts, I'm excited that you're just keeping doing them, and the momentum obviously is just so different. Where it's not like 2023 or 2024. You're like, yeah, nothing's happening, right? Like it's a different, definitely a different time. I'm curious. Before we let you go, like the private payments is very important. I think some of the guests that you've had, you mentioned Catherine wrote a great paper on kind of zero knowledge and pools and especially as institutional finance comes more and more online, right? And that seems to be a pretty big topic lately, where hedge funds or institutional traders actually don't want the level of sort of on-chain. It is a true use case for financial privacy as opposed to like obfuscation or laundering or something like that. Where do you think institutions will take this kind of privacy narrative? Because I feel like just as crypto goes, is these kind of like cypherpunks, like libertarian sort of streak, and I think privacy is a big part of that. You mentioned like fourth, fifth, amendment rights, free speech, obviously. How do you think institutions are going to impact this conversation?
Yeah, I think they are going to want privacy. There have been a lot of really smart people working on this for enterprise and institutions for a very long time. Off the top of mind, I think of Paul Brody over at EY, who has been doing this for just forever in the Ethereum space, trying to make these options available to their clients. Things like Aztec just launching earlier this week. That's going to be a very powerful L2 in the Ethereum ecosystem and others. So it's still early, right? And it's still early in Zcash too, even though we've had this rise recently. If you think about the big picture and you think about, like, if you're looking at market caps and such, Zcash is only around 10 billion market cap, and Bitcoin is, $2+ trillion in market cap. So there's still just very, very little focus on privacy compared to the big picture. So I think we're going to see that change in coming years, and that we'll see the privacy projects become actually mainstream. And I would like to see them in the top 5 or so cryptos, and have CNBC talking about Zcash and other privacy coins, as well as Bitcoin and XMR, and not XMR, but Ripple and other things.
Hey, Paul, before we let you go, just curious, I feel like there's this sort of push and pull on the Hill right now. There's definitely this push and pull on the Hill right now over DeFi, obviously, but I feel like there's one faction of maybe lawmakers who say there has to be this give and take on DeFi and privacy, right? Like you can't have full privacy and full compliance at the same time. And maybe there's some folks in the industry that also feel that way. But Rebecca Rettig, who's chief legal officer at Jito, and she's a friend of the show, she always says permission DeFi is not DeFi. So how do you respond? I'm curious to lawmakers who think that that's the only path forward, that like there has to be some kind of version of like permission DeFi.
Well, I 100% agree with Rebecca. And I would say that if you're thinking about these alternatives, you can't have freedom without the ability to have private transactions. And we need private transactions in DeFi as well. So to me, that's the trade-off. Are we willing to trade off our economic freedom and basically the foundation of our open and liberal society here in the US for a surveillance system that allows policymakers to actually see all the transactions going through the system. To me, that's not the kind of society I want to live in. And it turns out to be like that's very much like societies that we as Americans look at, like China and others, that are really just not aligned with our values. And I'm not willing to say that we have to give up our privacy. I just think that's a non-starter, and we have to fight for that. And I'm all for law enforcement, and I'm all for stopping the bad guys. Let's just not do it through crypto rails, and let's do it through other mechanisms.
Yeah, that makes sense. Paul, thank you so much for coming on today, and we'll be keeping an eye on Zcash and everything else.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Good to see you.
Appreciate
Thanks,
what you
Paul.
guys do. Take care.
Well, all right. Well, up next, more than 60 crypto firms just sent President Trump a crypto Christmas list urging action on taxes, tax regulation, and DeFi protections, while Congress works to pass market structure legislation, which, as we mentioned in the beginning of the show, is probably not going to get done until at least early 2026. Joining us now to discuss is Colin McLaren, Engagement Director at the Solana Policy Institute, the group spearheading the letter, and I believe spearheading the whole process. As we understand it, Colin, you were kind of the one who put this whole thing together.
Yeah, we were so excited to work with folks from all corners of the industry on putting together what I kind of informally called our Christmas list to the administration on what we can get done before the end of the year to really unlock a ton of the regulatory arbitrages that currently exist between us and traditional finance that we need to move forward as an industry. We're working hard on market structure. That work is incredibly important, and I think we're so excited to see a bill continue to work its way through the Senate. But these are changes that can happen now that would deliver real value to crypto investors, crypto users, and would deliver real clarity for crypto builders and founders.
Mm-hmm. Colin, we have this up on the screen right now. Well, we did with the bullet points that said what were the top priorities for the industry kind of on this front. Out of all of these areas, which one is the most important to you? And then also, why do you think now is the right moment to send it, aside from the nice, catchy Christmas crypto Christmas wish list? Wow, I cannot speak today. That's a mouthful. A good alliteration, though.
I think for us, tax clarity is critical. These are changes that if we put them in now could take effect in the 2026 tax year, which would allow for folks to completely change their investment theses for 2026 in regards to staked assets. These are changes. These were some of the few low-hanging fruit changes that the Gensler Biden administration put in place that hamstrung staked assets that we would be able to immediately unlock to allow for people to be taxed at sale of assets instead of receipt of staking rewards. It would also allow us to make the argument that these should be treated as newly created property and not ordinary income. The other items on the wish list are incredibly important as well. I think we look at developer protections in market structure is critically important, but the administration, the DOJ, a range of we're really throwing the kitchen sink at making sure that Roman Storm is not unjustly prosecuted as he has been. And so we put that in there. We want to bring this to the administration's attention that this is unjust, that this needs to be worked on, and that the president himself should be aware as the process continues and potentially insert himself where that's important.
Yeah. So, Colin, you mentioned kind of the kitchen sink approach that you guys had here. I think obviously Ellie mentioned that there were more than 60 projects that signed on. Say Labs was happy to be involved in this as well. But the issues that you're putting out there, I think, are incredibly important. And you guys, as Solana Policy Institute, have kind of a unique perspective in terms of the cat herding and consensus building around these sort of like 60 projects. Do you see enough of a kind of a unified front on these issues that it makes that easy for you, or do you still think that there's sort of a lot of things maybe outside or even within this issue list that some in the industry are kind of interpreting differently? Like how do you view sort of that? Yeah.
I think there's broad unity among the industry, particularly among the 60 plus signatories on this letter, that these things need to happen. Some issues don't affect other projects. But I think we all work together to express in one voice that these are the things the broader industry needs. A rising tide lifts all boats. And I think everyone understands that. You'll see anybody from, DeFi exchanges to, groups like Solana Policy Institute to the trade associations themselves. We got all three on board. There might be 60 signatories, but having those three trade associations indicates that we have whole of industry support for this list. And we want to make sure that the White House is appreciating that, along with Congress supporting those.
Colin, I'm curious. We see a lot of industry letters to the administration, right? To Treasury, to the IRS, to the White House. Do you guys ever get a response? Like, what's kind of the process here? I'm curious. I don't think I've ever asked that question. So I'm just curious to know, like, do
Yeah,
you
like, what's
get
the
like a receipt saying like, hey, we got it? Or like, how do you know that your letter was received and that the administration, is taking it
checking
seriously?
the list?
Checking the
Yeah.
list, right?
I think if you ask crypto at the beginning of the year what its wish list for the administration was, there are a range of things that we got done. And we checked those things off. You see wins like Genius, bipartisan, led by the White House with folks like Bo Hines and Patrick Witt pushing and leading the way. You saw the broker rule CRA, where we were able to get that onto the president's desk and signed to give real clarity to actors in the DeFi space. Looking at a letter like this is really a door opener. This is an opportunity for the administration to invite us in to have a conversation, for us to ask to have a conversation with the administration, and really serves as a great first piece of paper to kind of start having conversations with the people that are able to implement these changes. Obviously, we will be looking down it and seeing what we can accomplish before the end of the year. Top of our list at SPI is a staking tax. So we'll be having conversations with the people over at the Office of Tax Policy, at the IRS, and within the administration to make sure that those priorities are moved forward. And I'm sure the range of other individuals and organizations that are listed on that letter can take the issue that they care about and use that letter as an opportunity to open the door with the administration and begin the conversations they need to have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Also, I would love to know from your perspective, kind of like the vantage point from Solana Policy Institute, like what would a truly innovation-friendly U.S. regulatory environment look like over the next 2 to 3 years? We talked about how like this past year has been such tremendous growth and like the kind of evolution of like what we wanted at the beginning of the year to where we are now. But then what kind of looks like the next step forward?
I think from a regulatory perspective, it's more of the same. It is a continuation of the great work the SEC and the CFTC have done with Project Crypto and with the CFTC's push. Continuing those and fully supporting those with a whole of government approach is going to be a winning strategy for crypto for the next 2 to 3 years. Obviously, Genius is unlocking a ton of different rulemakings that are need to occur. I think the administration continuing its open door policy with the industry is going to be a winning strategy and unlock incredible value in the United States, and further encourage projects that may have moved abroad to come back home.
I'm curious, Colin. Really appreciate you hopping on today, and definitely again applaud the efforts of getting the letter together. We are, of course, big fans of tax clarity, and clarity around staking in particular. I know we've been looking for ways to work some of this into legislation, and they just don't seem like they've been coming up, right? You mentioned there have been great wins, like the DeFi broker rule. A lot of that seems to come from, and a lot of the content of the letter seems to come from looking for IRS guidance. Do you think at this point there's a path forward on including some of this language in a bill, or do you think like the main avenue we have right now is definitely just going through the IRS for regulatory clarity?
I think we can get immediate fixes that unlock for the 2026 tax year, which is potentially hundreds of millions of dollars in benefit to tax clarity. I think specifically around standalone crypto tax legislation, there's incredible work being done by the Miller and Lummis offices, as well as Daines in the Senate, on getting a bill together that would package up a ton of our top priorities, some of which are listed in the letter, and passing it in one standalone package. One of the benefits of getting IRS guidance done is when you make IRS guidance, it becomes standing law. in the Senate, in the House and the Senate, when you want to write a crypto or a tax bill, that bill is scored by the Joint Committee on Taxation using the impact as opposed to standing law. So if we allow the IRS to establish guidance, it will minimize any of the costs that we might see that staking would have from a JCT perspective. Doing the guidance streamlines the process for getting a bill done and for including staking tax in its full and correct treatment.
Great. Nice. Well, Colin, thank you so much for coming on and explaining all that to us. And we hope you get your Christmas wish. And we'll check back in with you. We'll check back in with you soon.
Yes.
Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, appreciate it. Good to see you.
All right, squad.
That was a tongue twister and a half, Jacqueline.
It's crypto Christmas wish list. I swear I'm literate. I could read. I could speak.
It's been a long week. And aren't you like 2 hours ahead of us? So you're like a little off time schedule.
It's 3 o'clock.
Yeah. Your brain just wants to say it in Spanish. You're just that's what it's preventing right now.
Navidad? Yeah, right? Christmas Navidad. I don't know.
Navidad de crypto.
Yeah,
there we
go. Are you?
There we go.
Are you fluent in Spanish?
No. But,
okay.
I've been taking it on Duolingo.
Get around.
Yeah, I've been doing it. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
That's great.
Oh gosh, I'm lacking.
I feel like sometimes it's hard to get 3 guests in, but I think all of them actually, were able to get some good time, say some really insightful things.
Yeah, and we're
and 3 hosts.
3 hosts. And
3 hosts. I know. Hi, I'm back. I'm sorry.
Are we just want to
next Friday for Black Friday?
Great question. What do we think?
I think we are. Should we ask the chat?
Yeah. Ask our viewers, do you want to hear from us after Thanksgiving?
You guys want to hear from us the day after Thanksgiving when you're probably really hungover and full of turkey? Let us know.
Yeah. Maybe we could just come on and say what we're thankful for this year.
Oh, that would
be boring. No, I'm kidding.
We'll figure something out.
Yeah.
I do, as always, want to shout out our live listeners. We have 7,500 live listeners right now. So we love you guys, and we will be back same time, same place next week. But TBD, let us know if you want to hear from us. And if not, we understand. If so, we'll see you next week. But in the meantime, yes, happy Thanksgiving, and we'll see you all very soon.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, guys.